Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our program on the transition to the Unique Entity ID SAM. I'm Ken Goldman. I'm part of the Stakeholder and Outreach team at the Integrated Award Environment inside of GSA. Welcome to today's program. I want to make sure that everybody is aware, just some housekeeping items. We are recording, so I want to make sure that you're aware of that. Here at IAE, we manage several systems who traditionally have used the DUNS number and will begin using the Unique Entity ID SAM shortly. I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with the System for Award Management, or SAM.gov. Today's presentation is the third on this particular topic about the transition. Today, we're focusing on how the change is going to look for you when you use our systems like SAM.gov and FPDS.gov. It's a long program that we're going to try to get through today in just about an hour. So if you've joined our programs before, we normally do try to set aside some time for Q&As, but I don't think we're going to have time today. So no Q&As will be answered at the end of today's program, but I want to make sure that everybody is aware that we have a really robust set of frequently asked questions that pretty much is going to answer any question that you have about the transition. And you can get to those FAQs both on SAM.gov and on our Federal Service Desk, FSD.gov. On FSD, there's a huge green button right on the homepage, and it says information about UEI. So you can just click right on that and get right to it. And in the chat log today, we'll also be posting links to the FAQs. A lot of people always want to know if we're going to make the slide deck available. We definitely will. We will post the slide deck and we will post a recording of this event. Usually takes us a couple days, so look for maybe Friday or maybe even Monday, but we'll get it up and you'll be able to see the deck and review the recording. We post it on our Interact page, which is our blog posting platform. And again, I'll put a link to that in the chat log over on the right-hand side of Zoom. So with that housekeeping in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started. My colleague, Kat Rollins, has a lot to get through, lots of information. I'm going to turn it right over to her. So go ahead, Kat.
Thank you so much, Ken, and good day, everyone. I would say afternoon. I am on the East Coast, but I was seeing in the chat window, we have folks from a variety of other locations. So welcome and thank you everyone for your time today. I'm hoping everyone will get a little bit of extra information out of this. As Ken said, this is the third part in a series. If you were not able to attend our other two presentations, you shouldn't be at a loss for anything here. I'm going to do some snippets to cover some of those other topics. For those of you, if you were able to join us for those prior presentations, I'm going to get to go into a little bit more detail on the actual April transition and some timing of things and how it's going to occur. So you will get some additional information. It's not going to be a repeat of before. With that being said, I want to go to the specifics of the agenda and just sort of reiterate, my name is Catherine Rollins. I am a lead program manager within IAE, which is in the General Services Administration. And specifically, I'm working on a lot of the modernization within SAM.gov and specifically leading this change of the UEI from the DUNS to the Unique Entity Identifier SAM within the IAE suite of systems. So today, what we're hoping to cover and answer kind of questions for you are specifically around what is the Unique Entity ID, when is it changing, why is the change from the DUNS number to the Unique Entity ID SAM happening, what does the change look like for me, what is not changing, and where to get help after April 2022. So to kick things off, starting off with what is the Unique Entity ID SAM and when is it changing? So in today's world of federal government contracting, we use the DUNS number. The DUNS number is a 9-character numeric value, and it's managed, granted, and owned by Duns and Bradstreet. So today, if you do sub-award reporting, if you do contracting with the government, generally you are asked for not just your entity information, but you will be asked specifically for your DUNS number. In sam.gov for registrations and for other reporting, again, it is done with the DUNS as the unique entity identifier. That is the world today. Starting April 4th, 2022, we are moving to a unique entity ID SAM. This is going to be a 12-character alphanumeric value, and it's managed, granted, and owned by the government. At the bottom of this slide, it shows kind of what visually these two different IDs look like, because they are very different. But the idea here is that every entity has a unique identifier. Right now, authoritatively, it is the DUNS number, which is that 9-character numeric value. Starting April 4th, it will be the unique entity ID with 12-character alphanumeric value. So when is this transition happening? I mentioned April 4th on the slide before. What we are doing with this transition is today, we have a transition period going on right now. So the DUNS number is still the authoritative identifier, but we have already made sure that the unique entity ID SAM is available in search, display, and exports of all of our IAE systems. The unique entity ID SAM is not authoritative, but we are showing it so entities can start getting used to where it can be found. Downstream systems can start using it and be aware of the changes. Because the DUNS number is still the authoritative identifier, if users are registering or performing other actions with the federal government, they are still required today to go to DNB to get a DUNS number to start those activities. If you need to today change the legal business name or address, you still have to go to DNB. So right now, again, DUNS is still the authoritative identifier. The current processes of how to get help and how to change the entity information remains the same, how it has been. The only change right now is that we are showing the non-authoritative, but the future unique entity ID SAM for entities in search and display of all IAE systems, to let folks start seeing what that looks like. Starting April 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to April 4th, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, sam.gov will be down for a maintenance window for this transition. We have to prepare data on the back end. We have to make sure that we do all of the front end, back end, extraction, all of the changes around this identifier changing and ensuring that our downstream systems have the correct information as well. So it is a larger outage window, and that's why we're trying to prepare folks for this, but we do need that full time to make sure that everything is done correctly. And when we come back online, we are fully prepared and folks can continue doing business the way they need to. When we do come back online on April 4th, 2022, at that point in time, the unique entity ID SAM will be the authoritative identifier. The DUNS number will not be available in any of the IAE systems. What this means is that the DUNS number will not be able to be in search. It will not be a filter that we use. It will not be on display pages, and it will not be in extracts. Starting April 4th, 2022, users will get a unique entity ID in SAM, and they will not be required or asked to supply the DUNS number from that point forward. If after April 4th, an entity needs to change its legal business name or address, those changes can actually be done through sam.gov. And I'm going to go through today what some of that looks like in the future in that April 4th date state in just a couple minutes.
Kat, I'm going to pause you just for a sec. We've had a whole bunch of people join in just the last couple of minutes. Little housekeeping, I want to make sure that everybody is aware. We will make the slide deck and the recording of this event available on our GSA Interact in just a few days. I will post the link to Interact in the chat log. And I also want to make sure that everybody is aware that I have been posting links to our frequently asked questions that will have answers to pretty much every question you can come up with, we hope. All right, back to you, Kat. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ken. Yes. The next slide that I wanted to walk folks through is for specifically unique entity ID changes. So this is for folks who are getting ready to start a change. They are coming in for a registration to SAM, or they are looking to update their registration or make changes to their registration. Wanted to walk through timeline that will help you potentially make decisions on when you are going to start these activities. So the idea is that on March 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern time, that will be the last day to get a DUNS number for federal award purposes. This means if you are working with DNB to get a DUNS number, you've not already received one. If you don't get it by 5 p.m. on March 29th, we ask that you wait until we are back online on April 4th, and then you can come in and do the full registration process or even the Get UEI process, and you will not need a DUNS. So it's kind of not needed after that point. If you are already in the middle of an update or already in the middle of a registration and you've gotten the DUNS by that March 29th, 5 p.m., you can go ahead and continue your registration process. Starting March 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern time through April 1st at 8 p.m. Again, if you already have that DUNS number, then you have through that window essentially to keep making changes. So you can start registering an entity. If you make it all the way through the submit, then great, you can submit it. All actions are still open at that point in time. And you can go through SAM to just get the unique entity ID SAM if that's all that you need. We do ask, just because we are preparing on April 1st at 8 p.m. to go offline, we will save what you have at that point in time. But the ask is to make sure that if you are midway through a page for data entry or some other action, make sure that you have saved that information before you leave, or before, again, 8 p.m. you are kicked out of the system. So try to make sure that if you're working up to that deadline, that you do stop yourself before that 8 p.m. to complete actions. That's where we're going to make our cutover. Again, information that is saved as of 8 p.m. Eastern time on April 1st. When you come back into the site after we open back up, come back online, the data will be there. The next step is the idea that on April 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern time is when we are going to be kicking folks out. We are actually going to, if you're logged in, we will kick you out, and we will have a maintenance page that will be shown if someone tries to come to sam.gov or any of our other any of our sub pages. It will show that we are out. Why are we out? It will have some additional help context for folks through the transition, but that will remain in place until we come back online. Once we come back online, again, the DUNS number will no longer be accepted. The UEI SAM will become the identifier of record. And at that point in time, you can resume any of the activities that you are currently doing on SAM.gov. So if you were in process or you needed to start the Get Unique Entity ID SAM, you can do so. You can start a registration or continue with a saved registration. You can update entity information on SAM.gov instead of with DNB. You'll need to start over with any updates not saved in DNB by March 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So if you were in the middle of discussions with Duns & Bradstreet at that March 29th at 5 p.m. for an address change, a hierarchy change, any of those things, that change is not going to make it over to SAM. So just a cautionary point there. If you need to proceed with any annual entity registration renewals or updates, you can go ahead and do so as soon as we're back online. And if you haven't already, you can update your ad hoc reports and save searches with the Unique Entity ID SAM field. To make sure folks know a little bit more broadly, because up to this point, it's kind of been focused on SAM outage. Across IAE though, we are going to have to make changes and updates to all of our sites to ensure that this transition is smooth for our users and that we're back online on that April 4th timeframe. So starting April 4th, the systems that will be down starting at 8 p.m. Eastern time, SAM.gov, ESRS, FSRS, FAPIS, and CPARS. So the past performance, the sub-award systems, and SAM. On April 2nd, starting at 8 a.m. Eastern time, so this Saturday, April 2nd, FPDS and the ATOM feeds will go offline for their changes. FPDS should be back up no later than 5 p.m. Eastern time on that Saturday, April 2nd. Looking to Sunday, April 3rd, we're looking for ESRS and FSRS to be back online no later than 10 p.m. Eastern time. And then on April 4th, that's the Monday, we're looking for SAM.gov and the FPDS ATOM feeds to be back online no later than 9 a.m. Eastern time. And then we have CPARS and FAPIS, which are going to be back online no later than 6 p.m. Eastern time. And so all of these systems, before April 1st, 8 p.m., before that time frame, the DUNS number is still authoritative. It will still be on and is accepted through those sites. At the same time, we are showing and displaying the UEI SAM. From the time April 1st, 8 p.m. that the sites go down, when they come back online, they will be coming back online with the DUNS number no longer showing, the DUNS number no longer being accepted, and the UEI being the authoritative identifier. And that is across all of these systems. So after the when this is happening, wanted to briefly go over the why is this change from the DUNS number to the Unique Entity ID SAM happening. If you've been in any of our prior conversations, this is kind of a redo for you, so I'm going to keep it high level, but it's the understanding that we're making this change. It is a federal government-wide initiative. It is not a GSA thing. It is not a SAM thing. The directive actually came from the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, to all federal agencies to complete their transition to the unique entity ID no later than April 4th, 2022. So we are in compliance with that, with our schedule and with our changes. The idea here of why is to streamline the federal government entity registration process and trying to make it easier for businesses to do business with the federal government. With this change, we can now have entities assigned the identifier during the registration process without needing to go to a third party for help. There's also the idea that you can request an ID directly through sam.gov without having to go through the full registration if you don't need that as part of your requirements. And again, you don't have to go to a third party. You can just obtain one at sam.gov. We do ask if you have a specific federal agency that you are interfacing with or that you work with for procurement award processes or systems, grant award processes or systems, invoicing or payment processes or systems. We do ask that you reach out directly to those federal agencies as to their transition plan, any outages that they're going to have, how they are doing this transition. Today, as I mentioned above, I'm going through the IAE systems and the SAM changes, but different agencies are going to have different outages or may have different timelines for when exactly they have done their changes. So there's an example for grants.gov on here, but other agencies will have their own information out there as well. The next focus that I wanted to help folks out with was, what does this change look like for me? So today, again, when you go to sam.gov and you search, there is a filter and a couple of our domains, the contract opportunities, as well as in our entity information. And in there is a filter for DUNS unique entity ID. In the future, when we come back online after the transition, you will only have the unique entity ID filter. This was what is currently shown as the SAM unique entity ID filter, and in future will just be the unique entity ID. If a user after that April change comes in and tries to put in the DUNS number, either in the keyword search or in the unique entity ID field, it will not return results. Just to be clear on that one. Because again, the DUNS number after the April transition will not be showing up in our systems. When you actually get to a results page currently in SAM, you do see the DUNS number, unique entity ID, and below that is SAM unique entity ID. Right now, again, that DUNS number is authoritative, so it is shown first. And then while we're in this transition period, we do show the SAM unique entity ID, which is that forward-facing number. After April, the DUNS unique entity ID goes away, and we will simply be showing the unique entity ID, that 12 alphanumeric ID instead. What this change looks like in FPDS, very similarly, there's a red box around the area where right now we are showing the unique entity ID DUNS, and then the unique entity ID SAM, as well as the ultimate parent DUNS and the ultimate parent SAM. Right now, you see both of these, all four of these fields in FPDS. After the April change, you will just see unique entity ID for each one of these fields, and it is again going to be that 12 alphanumeric ID. When you go to a detailed page on sam.gov, today you do see again that DUNS and the SAM both showing up on the detailed display pages. In April, it's just going to be the unique entity ID. Same place where it is now, just going to be the single field. As a reminder for folks, if you have saved searches, you will want to go in and update those now. What this means is that right now, if you are currently using that DUNS unique entity ID as a filter for your saved searches, after the April change, you will not have the expected result if you try to use that. Because again, DUNS is going away. So what you will want to do is go into your saved searches, look for anything that does have that DUNS unique entity ID as a filter. You can rerun the search, change, make sure that you are using instead that SAM unique entity ID field, and you can resave your search. With that change, what will happen is that after April, when you come back in, as you can see here, there'll be the unique entity ID SAM, and you will then be able to see your filters there. So again, in the saved searches, if you currently have a saved search that is using the DUNS, you will want to replace it with the unique entity ID SAM field instead. The other area to make sure you're changing around, if you have any ad hoc reports, again, that are using the DUNS filter, you will want to make sure that you update those to the unique entity ID. The idea is that the DUNS number attribute will be removed with this April change. After April, you will only be able to see the unique entity ID attribute. So you want to make sure you've switched that over as well. If you have ad hoc reports that are currently using that DUNS number attribute, you want to make sure you switch over to using the unique entity ID attribute. In our exports, right now, we do make sure that you see both the DUNS unique entity ID and the SAM unique entity ID. The note is again, after April, you will not see the field that says DUNS unique entity ID. The label and the information will be removed, and you will only see the unique entity ID and the 12 alphanumeric character ID. One of the other changes we're making on the back end of the system is we are changing our entity validation service. This goes in line with changing the DUNS number from DNB. We're also having to switch our EVS services. What this means is that there will be a validation process that will need to occur for an entity to switch from DNB to our new EVS provider. If you registered before April 4th, so you have an active registration before April 4th, you will revalidate your entity as part of the normal update or renewal process. So you do not need to take any actions at the time of the transition. If you have that active registration, you already have a UEI SAM, so you don't need to take any action there. And for this revalidation to switch EVS providers, you do not need to take action until or when you update or renew. At that point in time, you will go through, you'll select like normal your update as the action, and it will send you through the process to revalidate as a part of your update. But come April 4th, you don't need to take any direct action differently or independently from what you're already doing. For any entity registrations that are work in progress, so if you started a registration before April 1st, and when we come back online, you're still in that draft work in progress state, you have not submitted and you're not active, right? At that point in time, you will be asked to validate your entity. What this is going to do is the screenshot showing here, you will have an alert on your workspace area for validation required. And you will, under your actions, see the action item to validate your entity. You will not have an option to complete your work in progress or take the next steps on your work in progress until you finish validating. What the validation is going to do is walk you through, here's the entity that you currently have, here's the entity in the EVS, do these match? If they match, you just confirm and continue through any updates or any other part of the work in progress that you would like to update. You can do this right away. You can also wait if you are still working on gathering specific information or data for your work in progress before you continue your registration. You can wait until you're ready to continue working on your entity registration and come in at that point in time. And again, those same triggers will be there. If you start the registration process or the Get Unique Entity ID process after April 4th, so basically our maintenance window starts April 1st at 8 p.m. When we come back online after that maintenance window, if that is when you are starting your registration or getting your unique entity ID, you will not need to take any additional steps. At that point in time, we will be on the new EVS provider. And so when you do your registration, it will automatically be a part of that process. You don't have any other steps, stages, alerts, nothing else. So again, if you're registered, you have an active registration before April 4th, you will be asked to revalidate. It's going to be part of your normal update renewal process. Anything that is work in progress, as of that April 1st, when we start our maintenance window, when you come back in to continue working on your work in progress registration, you will be asked to validate your entity at that point in time. And if you start a registration or get unique entity ID after April 4th, then the validation is just a part of your process. You don't have to do anything extra. To help folks out, I did want to go over a couple of what is not changing. So,
Hey, Kat.
Yes.
Kat, sorry, just wanted to kind of interrupt you there again for just a little bit of a housekeeping update. I know we've had some people drop off, some people have been joining the entire time. So I just want to make sure again that everybody understands. We know that there are a lot of questions, but with several thousand people on the line, there's no way that we can respond to each and every question. So I just want to encourage people to go to both the sam.gov homepage and the FSD Federal Service Desk, fsd.gov homepage. And there are big green buttons on both homepages that have all kinds of information about this transition. There is more than just the FAQs. So there's a tremendous amount of information available for you. And it is great to know that everybody is so engaged in this that I think the FSD is a little slow right now. I think a lot of people are trying to get to the FAQs. So just be assured they're not going anywhere. They'll be there later today, tonight, they'll be there tomorrow. So we're sorry if there's a little bit of slowness at FSD, but I just think a lot of people are trying to access the same thing. So, and then finally, I'll just remind everybody that we are going to make this slide deck and this recording available online on Interact in a couple of days. So you'll be able to get all of the information you need. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you so much, Ken. Hopefully not too many questions on what's not going to change, but we'll see. So things that are not going to change with this transition. Right now, you can search for an entity and see those that just have a unique entity ID, says ID assigned, and those with an active or inactive registration by those statuses. Those statuses will continue to be shown in the same format, in the same place, through and after the April transition. So those things don't change. If your registration is active, when we go down for our maintenance window, you will continue to be active when we come back online. Same thing, inactive. Those aren't going to change in the middle there, and ID assigns as well. So your status beforehand will be your status after. So right now, you manage your entity from the entity management workspace in sam.gov. This will continue to be your personal workspace for your entities. So this is when you sign into sam.gov, you go to your workspace and then your entity area. That is all going to be the same. The same entities should even be showing up after the transition. The only difference on that workspace page is, again, you will no longer see the DUNS unique entity ID. You will only see the unique entity ID. On your roles and access, again, those are not changing as a part of the unique entity ID transition. So the same access that you have now, you should still have. The idea that, where you go to see your roles and how you process a request or a change or an assignment, all of that functionality is staying the same. Again, the only difference is like here on this view that I'm showing, instead of seeing the DUNS and the UEI, you will only see the UEI after April. So to touch on a couple of the frequently asked questions that we have been getting. The first one is, can I keep using my DUNS to identify my entity for government purposes after April 4th, 2022? The answer is a definitive no. After April 4th, 2022, you must use a unique entity ID, which is a 12-character alphanumeric identifier. If your entity is already registered, you can go to SAM right now, and you can see your assigned unique entity ID. If I have a DUNS for government needs, do I need to go to sam.gov? Yes. If you had to go to DNB to get a DUNS and were told you did not need a sam.gov registration, then what you need to do is go to sam.gov and select to get a unique entity ID. This will go through the validation steps and that you receive the unique entity ID without needing to do the full registration. So just as before, when you went to DNB to get your DUNS number, you can come to SAM and get your unique entity ID without having to complete that full registration. That is just for the entities, again, who were basically told they did not need the full SAM registration. Which leads into the next FAQ, which is, do I still need to register my entity? This transition with the UEI, unique entity IDs, does not impact or change the requirements for the entity registration in sam.gov. If you needed to complete the registration in sam.gov before April, you will still need to do so after April. If you just had to go to DNB to get a DUNS and were told you did not need a sam.gov registration, then you now instead come to sam.gov and select Get Unique Entity ID. But again, this April transition of DUNS to Unique Entity ID SAM does not change any of the requirements around a SAM registration. The follow-on, if you already have a registration, do I still need to renew my entity? So just like the last one, this transition does not impact or change the requirements for entity registrations to update annually. To maintain an active registration, you will be required to renew your registration at least annually. So again, that's for that full SAM registration. That requirement is still there. If you only needed the unique entity ID, when you get that assigned, you do not have to renew for that, just to keep the ID. The annual renewal process is for registrations. Will my entity data change? No. We are assigning a unique entity ID in addition to the DUNS. We are not changing any entity data with this transition. So all the other data fields, purpose of registration, type of entity, cage, NCage, DIN, POCs, all of that other information will remain the same until an authorized user updates in SAM.gov per the normal update process. We are not changing or touching any of that data. This transition very specifically and only is about the unique entity ID, transitioning away from the DUNS. That is it. The next question is, how do I use my DUNS +4 after April? So to kind of clarify on this one, the unique entity ID is a one-to-one transition with the DUNS. The +4 was an electronic funds transfer, EFT indicator, used within the entity record. So this is where you could have one DUNS and multiple EFTs. The EFT data element and field are not changing and are a separate field from the unique entity ID. So if you have a current requirement to use the DUNS +4, you can check with your connecting agency for the unique entity ID and the EFT data after April 4th. But again, the EFT information, that +4 information that is in SAM, we are not changing that data element or that field with this transition at all. It's just the unique entity ID, which is a one-to-one transition with the DUNS. We mentioned that there's a little bit of a change in updating legal business name and address. So this question very specifically is around, how do I update my entity's legal business name or address after April 4th? And there's kind of three parts to this depending on what status you're in. If you're actually in the workspace or working on something, it'll be much clearer because you will only have the actions to do these things. So it sounds a little more confusing on a piece of paper here. But if you have an entity in a draft or pending status, you can select to validate the entity, which will allow you to correct and confirm the legal business name and address after April 4th. So if you go into your workspace or you're even on the search, and that's where you notice, hey, wait, my legal business name or my address is incorrect and it needs to be updated. You go over to your workspace area, find your entity, and from the actions, you'll be able to see a validate entity. If you have an entity with a unique entity ID assigned, or have an active or inactive registration, and again, you need to update the legal business name or address after April 4th, in that workspace area, under the actions, you can select update. Again, that will allow you to correct and confirm your entity details. If you don't see the validate entity option, simply select update and then registration, which will still allow you to correct and confirm your information. You're going to have one of those options no matter what state you're in. So again, when you're in that workspace area for your entity, If you're in a draft or pending status, your only option will be to validate the entity. So we'll guide you down that path to help out. If you have a unique entity ID assigned or an active or inactive registration, again, the action you can take is to update. That's the only selector. When you select to update, again, we will take you down and help you decide if there is a legal business name or an address change, or if you just continue through the process. So we'll help guide the users through that. Where do I get help after April? So we mentioned that there's a couple different changes on this. Ken has been mentioning our current kind of help for things on our homepage, kind of in the middle of sam.gov. There's a new button, and then next to that says learn more. From that link to learn more, there is a page that we have created that is all about the DUNS to unique entity ID SAM transition. This gives high-level details. It also walks through sort of further down on the page, kind of by user, how you might be impacted, any actions you need to take or don't need to take, some sample data pieces, timelines, you know, a lot of the information I've kind of gone over here, a lot of that is there on that page for access. And again, it goes through, as you can kind of see on the screenshot, you know, it goes through how am I affected? It's like I manage an entity. I'm a subcontractor. It goes through I'm a contracting officer, right? It goes from those different perspectives to help a user through what do you need to know specifically for this transition. The other resource for help, you know, like I said, on the sam.gov site, there's also, as Ken was mentioning as well, on fsd.gov. When you go to the main homepage, there's a big green button there that says help on UEI transition. If you select that, it will take you to a larger knowledge article area that will go through, you know, similar, you know, how to get the UEI, what is it, walk through, it's an interactive PDF, but how you should prepare based upon who you are and what you do in SAM to get you through the transition. These are great resources if you yourself maybe don't have any questions on it, but you're trying to help someone else through this process, or you're getting questions from other inputs. Again, these are open resources. They are publicly available, so you can feel free to share them with other folks. If you specifically need help with getting an entity ID after April 2022, what you're going to do is within the process itself. So when you go to select get entity UEI, get unique entity ID, sorry. When you get to the information page where right now you would see enter in your DUNS number, that field is no longer going to be there because the DUNS is no longer required. If you get a no match or multiple matches, or there's anything where you're like, this is not the entity that I'm trying to register, that I'm trying to get a UEI for, on the page, there will be a create incident button. If you need help getting your unique entity ID, in this case, the system couldn't find the match based upon the criteria I put in, then the system will create a help ticket with your information and assign an FSD ticket number. You will then receive the link to your ticket information. So again, it's the idea of you can get help directly on SAM, and it'll go over to an FSD agent who can review it and then help you with it. All within the SAM suite here. Similarly, if you have a hierarchy question, so if you've gone through or you're starting to go through your update, and again, you say there's a hierarchy question, again, you can go in to the sam.gov workspace And through the update process, you can create an incident, which will again allow you to have that conversation and automatically create the ticket for you with FSD to get clarification or to make a correction. If you have an entity name change, again, starting in April, you no longer need to go to Dun & Bradstreet. Instead, you simply begin the entity registration, or you start your update. And again, there will be a place there for create incident if you don't see the right match or the update isn't showing up. And from there, from the create incident, you can let the FSD agents know any additional information that helps out with the ticket. But again, it creates that ticket for you and it assigns an FSD number, sends it to an agent so they can start processing and working with you for the update. We do have a feedback tool on all of our pages. On the footer, you simply select that feedback with the little down arrow. And this is where you can put in additional feedback for us about our site. We do ask, this is more for general comments, wants, wishes, things that maybe could be done better. We do ask that if you have a technical issue or a specific question answered, that you actually go to the FSD. We do look at this feedback, but it is not real time. And it could be a while. So this is not the place to put a technical issue or a specific question that you have. If you do have one of those, please go to the Federal Service Desk so that we can get you help right away. But any other comments or opinions, we do like to see in that feedback, and we do take that into consideration as we're looking at future backlogs and improvements. And with that, I have our closeout slide, which is around, again, the federal transition. We also have our link here for our Interact community. We do put a lot of information up on Interact. I believe Ken was mentioning that is also where we're going to be posting this recording and the transcript around this meeting. And then we do have a TIC community as well. That's for our agency interfaces, system accounts, contract writing systems and such, who can join that. That is the end of my presentation for today. Ken, I was going to turn things back over to you at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. So just one last round of housekeeping items. I think we did mention this in the beginning. I want to make sure, again, a lot of people joined, a lot of people dropped off, not sure who's still there. Want to make sure that everybody is aware that this is a federal government-wide initiative. And what Kat has been walking us through today is how GSA is handling it. So I did see a bunch of questions coming in about other agencies, other systems. You'll need to follow up directly with those agencies about their own systems. But for purposes of what GSA is doing and how we're preparing, once again, we will have this slide deck and the full recording available on Interact. In just a minute here, I'm going to post for the final time the link to Interact, so you can sign up there and get an email once we post the content. You'll be notified to your email if you sign up. Otherwise, you can just check the link on Friday or on Monday. We'll get it up in just a couple of days. And last but not least, I know we've said this a million times. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware. Kat literally just walked us through it. There's all kinds of information on sam.gov and on fsd.gov. In addition to the frequently asked questions, there's articles, there's how-to videos, lots and lots of information out there that should hopefully answer a lot of your questions. So with that, we're going to end the recording. I'm going to post all that information one more time in the chat log, so we'll be live for just another 30 seconds or so. But thanks everybody for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.